'Cause like a winter tonight, I thought I would always have light. The quick flash that you gave to me, so dark I could barely see. Looking.
From wherever you are around the world, welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be exploring what is Judaism. With us today is a special guest, Rabbi Joel Berman from Temple Beth Emet. Welcome to the Circle, Rabbi.
Well, thank you, Carlo.
Well, this is a very interesting question. We had a show on what is Islam. Today I want to explore the religion of Judaism.
Okay.
And I think it's a lot more interesting and more complicated than people think.
Well, we don't have any kind of centralized organization. We don't have a papacy or a holy father at the head. We don't have like an ayatollah, being the head of a particular sect of the religion or anything. So everybody's pretty much on their own to do things. But there is an overarching there are overarching principles that keep everything sort of like on the Jewish front, that keep everything within the Jewish fold. Now, within that, there's a few different types of Judaism. You may have heard of Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist. And they're all different takes on how to fulfill or to live with or under these principles. But in general, there isn't a central Judaism. There isn't, and because of that, or as a result of that, one or the other, I'm not sure which came first, there isn't a dogma. There is no catechism. There isn't a single set of beliefs that you have to believe in order to be a Jew. Judaism is judged by its actions. What do people do? Are you a good person? So to us, you were talking about Christianity bashing. I have no interest in that. But, it was always a mystery to most Jews how you could have the salvation only by grace. We just don't get that,
It's a little different.
Yeah, so, we have more of the scale is tipped toward what do you do in this world? How do you help out?
That's actually a great question we're going to talk a little bit about later. How are you supposed to behave? But before we get started, because you mentioned a few different types of Judaism, Reconstructionism, I wanted to explore each one briefly. But before that, there's a question that sometimes confuses me. And I find this, how would you say, people don't know how to express it properly. But some people say, to be a Jew, you don't have to be religious. You just have to be born a Jew. Yeah, is there really a difference there? What's going on here?
Okay, yeah. No, it gets a little complicated at that.
I can't even say it's how complicated it was.
No, there is a cultural Judaism, and there is certainly a familiar sort of Judaism, a familial kind of Judaism, where you're born into it. According to Jewish law, if your mother is Jewish, then the child is Jewish. Now, this doesn't exactly conform with what's in the Bible, mind you. Oh. So I think it's probably a good place to mention that Judaism is not necessarily such a biblically oriented religion, but more a religion of the interpretation of the Bible through years of interpretation from early rabbis. The Pharisees, mentioned in the New Testament, are sort of the intellectual grandfathers of this sort of thinking. I think they get a bad rap in the Gospels, frankly.
Yeah,
they get picked on a bit, but they're really where we start.
Are they similar to the Hasidic Jews?
Well, no, that you're talking about something from the year 0 and the year 1800. In between there's lots of stuff.
Oh.
The Hasidic Jews are a branch of Orthodox Judaism. And one of the subsects of Hasidic Judaism would be like Chabad, which is probably the most popular or most widespread of the Jewish Orthodox movements. They're actually big on trying to get Jews who have not been active in the Jewish community back into the Jewish community and begin observing Jewish customs and laws and things like that. So they do a tremendous amount of work. We adopted 2 kids out of Guatemala, my wife and I. Hi, honey.
Wonderful.
And there was Chabad there.
There's a Chabad there.
Yeah, Chabad, you know, I joke that they're kind of like the Starbucks of Judaism. They're everywhere. Back when I was a kid, it would have been Howard Johnson's, but, you know.
Howard Johnson's. So let's explain. Let's explore some of these. We explored how we got a little bit of a taste of a Hasidic Jew. And you mentioned several others.
Well, before the middle of the 19th century, there really wasn't a big number of streams, is what they say in Hebrew. It's ramim. And the direct translation of that is streams. But denominations, I suppose, would be your closest English word. There wasn't a lot of, there wasn't a range of that. There was Judaism. You know, you were either a European, Ashkenazic type Jew, or you were a Sephardic, North African Jew, or what became to be called the Edot HaMizrach, the communities of the East. So you got your Iranians. You have a lot of Jews all through North Africa. But most of them were kicked out of their countries in 1948 when Israel became a state. And I don't want to get into all the politics at the moment.
It's another show.
You can if you want to. But at the time that a number of who are called Palestinians now were left their homes, either by force or because they thought they would come back to more, gain. And there are cases of each of those sorts of things and a few more. There were Jews all over the Middle East that were, if not forcibly kicked out, intimidated and pressured to leave. Israel took a lot of them in, but that was, like I said, that's part of the political picture. What I'm trying to get at here is that in the middle of the 1800s, a movement started in the aftermath of the Enlightenment to allow Jews, as Jews were being allowed more rights as citizens, they wanted to shed the image of being old-fashioned, retro. They would say things like the ritual laws of Judaism are no longer incumbent upon us, but what is the ethical and moral precepts of the prophets. And what would and this led to Jewish services abandoning the Hebrew, sort of just carving out a new direction on their own, based on mostly social action. That gave the purpose, and that's there in the prophets. Take care of the poor, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, unless you have a good magazine, and then
Let me ask you a quick question before we continue on, because you made me think of a question here. In the Enlightenment period, Christianity did almost similar things. They kind of got away from some of the ritualistic behavior, and science took over a lot.
Right, science was the new religion.
Same for Judaism.
Well, Judaism, didn't really change too much. It just sort of adopted whatever science worked for them, and the figuring out of Jewish calendars, and there was always the split between the Jewish world and the world at large. But what wound up happening, see, in the Jewish tradition, one of the big things you have to remember is that questions are not only encouraged, they're demanded. Now, I ran a Jewish-Christian dialogue group at my last pulpit in Ohio for 8 years, and I had people there who were not Jewish, had no intention of becoming Jewish. It wasn't their thing. They were good Christian people, but they came to our classes simply because they knew they could ask anything. And they'd been getting a lot of reaction from their pastors or from their clergy when they'd ask questions that about contradictions or discrepancies or anything like that in the Bible, and the answers they would get would be along the lines of "I'll pray for you," or "You need to speak to a Jewish rabbi." Like there's another kind of rabbi somewhere, And so people knew that they could ask me anything, and if I didn't know, I could get them started on something, and I would find out more about it, and get it back to them. But there was nothing that was off the table, and that's in that atmosphere of constant questioning. You get works like the Talmud. The Talmud is really what we base our Jewish law on, but what it is, it's the discussions of rabbis around Jewish principles. And it's always a question-answer format, even if it doesn't seem like that. There's long wandering and meandering passages, but they're attempts at an answer. to a question that was raised a few pages ago. Another, the Talmud's huge. The Talmud is, if you read one two-sided page of the Talmud every day of your life, and there are people who do this. They're called the page a day guys. I think this is where you get this. We're all on the same page because, like, all over the world, people are reading the same page of Talmud. And if you took one two-sided page every day, it would take 7.5 years to finish the Talmud.
7.5 years.
Right, and then you know what they do? Well, some people start again, some people join in, some people drop out, but first they have a party.
After 7.5 years?
Yeah, the last party was held at the MetLife Stadium in New Jersey.
Really?
Yeah, it was huge. So there's a lot of people who do this. My colleague Ellie Spitz just finished the entire cycle of reading the Talmud and had we call it a siyum, a concluding ceremony. And it was over at his synagogue in Tustin. Mine's in Anaheim. That's Temple Beth Emet, Anaheim.
Are rabbis
Was that subtle enough?
That's right. Are rabbis supposed to finish the Talmud during their seminary? Or?
It's not demanded. We're talking about a tremendous amount of work. We're talking about, it's just, if you start counting the commentaries, maybe sometime I'll come here with a page. You can have a camera on a page and I'll point to things.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah.
And it just tells you, it's like having a conversation from the biblical era. Because if you have a biblical quote, it's got a special little mark, so you know that you're quoting the Bible there. So it's got a conversation going on between quotes from the Bible and all the way up to about 1475.
Is that before or after Maimonides?
Well, it's after Maimonides, but the big thing that changed around 1475 was the printing press.
The Gutenberg, yes.
Yeah, so like before that, the Talmud was written in several scrolls, and you needed about 8 pairs of hands in order to keep the ones open that you need. Here's one, here's a commentary over here.
Oh, jeez.
But it would link you to other parts of the Talmud. There would be a little mention on the side here. For more on this, you go to something else. And so, like, it was the first hyperlink.
First hyperlink.
Yeah.
Let's go back before we wander too off on the Talmud, which is really interesting, actually.
Easy to do.
So what's a reconstructionist? What do they believe?
Well, let me get to that. Because in order to understand, you sort of like need a framework. Okay. So there was just Judaism, and then that was challenged by Reform Judaism. Now, when it became challenged by Reform Judaism, the just Judaism redefined itself as Orthodox. The word Orthodox had not been used before that.
Okay.
So you had, a lot of the Orthodox just sort of like dug their heels in and strengthened their position. No change whatsoever. There's a line in the Torah. It says there's nothing new. Anything new is forbidden. Well, what they're talking about is grain. They're talking about a crop that hasn't been properly tithed in order to give it to the priests for their share of the grain. These are guys that had no land. The priests and the Levites had no land. So they had to be supported by a system of everybody else that gave tithes, and it went to the Levites and the priests. It says there in the scripture that nothing new is allowed, but it's talking about this grain. So in the 1800s, a rabbi, I believe it was a fellow who called himself the Khatam Sofer, used that line in his fight against Reform Judaism. Anything new is forbidden from the Torah. So that was clever, but it certainly kept that split wide open. Now, when these Jews reached the shores of the New World, at first everybody again was in the Orthodox camp. Most of the early Jews that came to what's now the United States and North America came in the 1600s. They were from a Dutch colony.
Dutch Indies?
Dutch Indies, yeah.
Okay.
And they were fleeing the persecution from Europe, and they thought that they could, and they were passing as Christians. But when they got to their destination in the New World, they tossed that off and said, well, now we can be Jewish again. And then the Dutch came and said no. So they had to leave the Dutch, the West Indies or whatever, and then they made their way to New York, where the first colony started in like the 1600s. So a few years back, we had 350 years of Jewish people in the United States and North America.
Was the first deli open then, too?
Well, that's a good question, but I'm not sure because they had rye as a grain, but I'm not sure if they knew how to make rye bread yet. And mustard was something I'm not sure they knew how to deal with.
What I'm going to deal with right now, we have a few minutes left here. I want to see if you can...
No, I was going to say, out of that came conservative Judaism, which sort of struck a middle ground, and that's the grossest of simplifications. That's a very complicated process that I just summarized. And one of the rabbis in the conservative movement, a fellow named Mordechai Kaplan, developed a system of thought that was used to form the Reconstructionist strain. And the idea was to reconstruct Judaism as a civilization. It wasn't a religion, it wasn't a genetic people, it was a civilization.
And what I'm going to do in a little bit, in the next segment, we're going to discuss some of the beliefs. And if you can, maybe you can either tell us what your temple believes or what some of these views are. For instance, the afterlife, what does Reconstructionism say? What do the conservatives say? Mm-hmm. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The last 2 minutes here, I just wanted to get, we'll do rapid fire.
Okay.
What is the kippah, the yarmulke? What's the difference between a kippah and the yarmulke? Is there a difference?
Well, the yarmulke is a Yiddish word, which means it came originally from Europe. The language Jews talked to each other in Europe was Yiddish. They didn't use Hebrew because that was reserved for studying texts and prayer. But they spoke Yiddish. And the word yarmulke, I'm not exactly sure what the derivation of it is, but most Jews that I know who grew up in the United States in the last 50 years, know the word yarmulke. Kippah is a Hebrew word, means dome, so that the thing that covers your head is a kippah. But as I mentioned to you earlier, like the Shrine of the Dome in Israel, there's a dome. And the name for Little Red Riding Hood, this is a cute little thing, is Kippah Adumah, meaning red dome. Anymore it's an iron dome, but that's a different story, and we're back in the politics. But
I don't want to talk about the big bad wolf either.
Kippah Barzel. It was what they called
But what's the purpose of it?
The purpose of it is to remind you there's somebody up there looking at you, so behave.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Interesting. And
it's not what I was talking about Jewish law. It's not. There's no Jewish law that says you have to wear a kippah.
Oh, there isn't?
No, there's nothing in the books that says you have to keep your head covered. It became a very strong custom, though.
Interesting. A couple more things from the world of Judaism that some people always wonder about. One thing, we'll take you over to Israel for a quick second. What's the Wailing Wall?
The Wailing Wall is the western retaining wall of the ancient temples in Jerusalem. There's a hill, and up on top of the hill was the temple. And then there was a wall that retained the ground so it wouldn't erode. Well, when the temple was destroyed, the only thing that was left was that wall, and they called it the Wailing Wall. It's not used as much these days, Wailing Wall. Now it's usually called the Western Wall.
The Western Wall. And
it's as close as we can get to where the temple was, because the top of it, to keep the status quo, is run by the Islamic Waqf. And they control what goes on top of what we call the Temple Mount, and they call Haram al-Sharif is the Arabic term.
Haram al-Sharif.
Yeah. It doesn't mean the Jewish Holy Temple. That's the basic thing you need to know about that.
Okay. Well, listen, Rabbi, it was wonderful. We had great insight from you. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. I wanted to keep going, but we're going to have to wait for part 2. So you're going to have to wait and find out who the Jews think the Messiah is. We're going to find out about that from Rabbi Berman. We're also going to ask him the fastball question. So you're going to have to wait and find out what is the fastball question.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
I know our first segment, we really started getting into Judaism, where it came from, some of the different groups of Judaism people don't really know. We're going to try to tackle some of these little intricacies that are in Judaism. But the first question, we talked off camera, and I was kind of curious about, I know we ended with the kippah, or the yarmulke. Did Jesus wear a kippah, you think?
Probably. He was a Jew.
How long does the tradition of the kippah go?
Well, it's hard to say. But, I don't know, most of what you see in archaeological digs and things like that, or in inscriptions on walls, you see Jews with their heads covered mostly, one way or another. Sometimes they were in Middle Ages in Europe, they were forced to wear certain types of hats, not the very flattering types of hats.
Like the ones the Hasidics wear?
No, those are nice. These are pointed yellow things that that branded you as a Jew.
Really?
Yeah, you had this is where, the Nazis wound up with the yellow Star of David. You had to wear one of those if you were a Jew in Nazi-occupied areas and things like that.
Oh.
So anyway, that has nothing to do with Jesus. Jesus probably covered his head, yeah.
Well, since we're on Jesus now...
the most famous Jew in the world.
That's right. Who is the Messiah for the Jewish faith?
Well, it's an interesting point, and it would probably take a little bit of time to fully understand the concept, but the word, English is a Christian language. There are concepts that will be in English that you'll say the word, and they will have completely different meanings to a Christian audience than they will to a Jewish audience. Sin, for example. Sin to the Christian is one of those things that adds up to your going to hell.
Not for the Jews.
No, we don't really have hell.
We'll get to that in a little bit, too. Do you have sin, though?
Of course. But the word that we use for sin is the Hebrew word chet. Now, the word chet is an archery term.
Archery?
Yeah, it means you missed the mark.
Oh. Okay.
So the import here is that you get another shot for the most part.
Interesting.
So you can improve your life. Sin is not something that's irreversible, eradicable. There are sin offerings in Leviticus that you would bring a sin offering if you violated one of the Jewish laws, particular Jewish laws. And you would bring an animal, it would be sacrificed, and the priest would get some of it, and you would go home thinking, there but for the grace of God go I could have been that animal, paying for my sins by being slaughtered on an altar, but the animal took my place. And sacrifices, of course, was how people worshipped in early times.
Why did that disappear?
Well, it disappeared from the Jewish context because the Bible kind of defines sacrifice to a certain place. In the Torah it says, the place I will show you, it eventually becomes the temple in Jerusalem. And once the temple is destroyed, there's nowhere to do the sacrifice. So the people in exile didn't have that. So the first exile, we lost 10 tribes. We have no idea where people went. But they went, the leader, no, actually it wasn't the first exile, but that was the real first exile. That was 722 before the Common Era. It was the northern kingdom is shattered. And a lot of people come down to what's called Judah in the geopolitical area. By the time the Jews come back from Babylonia, they have these documents and forms and religious customs that enable them to be Jewish wherever you are. But before that, they didn't. They only had the sacrifices, and they didn't have something to carry them through. And we lost, like I said, they talk about those 10 lost tribes. A lot of them, like I say, filtered down into Judah. But a lot of them just went into slavery or into other places. They were just
Did
gone.
they disappear?
They're gone.
They're gone.
They're gone.
If the temple comes back, do animal sacrifices come back with it?
Well, there are people who are keeping their knives sharp. There's a group called the Temple Mount Faithful in Jerusalem, and much as I'm not really into advertising them, the they're advocating for the rebuilding of the temple and the restoration of the sacrifice. It's a very small minority, but the debate goes on, particularly within Orthodox Judaism, as to whether or not animal sacrifice will be returned to the temple if it's rebuilt. Now they also say that God will rebuild the temple overnight. You'll wake up one day and it's there.
Oh, really?
And so if that happens, people could be impressed into sacrifices.
It'll calm down the animal activists.
But in today's day and age, it would be tremendously difficult and tremendously bad press to resume that. We have enough problems, frankly.
We might touch on that.
But however, the sacrifices were replaced by prayer. There are prayers that we do that directly replace the sacrifices. And also by acts of loving kindness and charity. Charity is another one of those Christian English words. The Hebrew word for giving to people is called tzedakah. It comes from the word
tzedakah.
Yeah, it comes from the word for doing the right thing, that kind of justice. So to one group, charity comes from the Latin word from the heart. I think it's coritas. And that charity that comes from the heart is the highest value, but to the Jew, you give to people because it's the right thing to do, and whether or not it comes from the heart, because if you wait for it to come from the heart, you might be waiting a very long time. So it becomes part of Jewish law, encoded and embedded that you have to give tzedakah.
The Ark of the Covenant.
Oh yeah.
Is that up in Turkey still?
Well, I thought it was in an underground storehouse in Washington, D.C. Right. I saw the movie.
That's right. Noah's Ark is in Turkey. That's
right.
Where is it again?
At the end of Indiana Jones, Lost Ark. It's down in a warehouse.
Is there a Jewish group like the one Temple Mount? Are they looking for the Ark as well? Does it mean anything in the Jewish faith?
Not really.
Not really?
I recommend people read Richard Elliott Friedman's Who Wrote the Bible.
He's coming on the show actually next month.
Really? I'd love to be here for that. I like him.
You like him?
Yeah, I used his book to teach a course.
Oh, excellent.
So I think he's sharp.
Maybe we'll have to ask Rabbi Berman to join us on that show for a special co-host.
Hey.
Never know. So we got the Ark of the Covenant. One quick question.
Oh, we just don't know where it is.
We don't know where it is.
We don't know whatever happened. There is a theory, and Professor Friedman describes it, that it originally was brought inside the temple, that the Ark that was the portable tabernacle, that it was brought inside the temple and it stayed there. There's linguistic support for that. If you read it carefully, the text indicates that may have happened.
Was it the Coptic Christians that have it down?
Well, they may say that. I tend to doubt it.
You can't go in there and see. Quick question. I know in Christianity right now is a movement. I'm not sure how long it's been going on, but there are two different views of the Bible. And specifically here, we'll just look at the Old Testament. Allegorical or factual?
Well, factual is a modern word. I will say that until right around that, in a very rough way, 1800s, people started to get the idea of taking the Bible literally. That literally it was 6 days of creation, and that literally these things happen in the way that they happen. But up until that point, literal interpretation of the Bible was sort of at a minimum. It was always taken as allegory. It was always taken as a teaching tool. Torah means instruction.
It was a manual of a sort.
Yeah. Matter to the point where there's a body of work called the Midrash. The Midrash is the ancient rabbi's way of interpreting and filling in gaps in the scripture, so that where you think something ought to happen, they were on top of that. And this is what happened where you were looking. What were we just saying?
Talking about the Bible and the old allegories.
Right. The Midrash talks about the thing you were talking about.
Talking about allegorical and
Bang.
We never got to the Big Bang, but
the Big Bang is a modern way of looking at that Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, there was nothing.
Can Judaism reconcile with the Big Bang theory?
Yeah, we're not too. There's lots of Jews who are scientists. And they can be orthodox. A lot of Nobel Prize winners in economics and in science were Orthodox Jews. But the idea of what we're talking about is that the first 6 days. Well, the first 6 days could have taken 14 billion years. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan has it worked out through biblical support that it actually took as long as the scientists say.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Rabbi Ariel Kaplan.
Aryeh, Aryeh.
Interesting. Okay, so good. So Big Bang Theory can be reconciled with Judaism?
Yeah, and we're not adverse to that. Look, science asks a certain kind of question. How did this happen? What are the conditions in physics and science that led to biology, et cetera, that led to a certain thing to happen? Religion asks questions like, why did this happen? What's the moral lesson you can get out of this? How do I use these stories to run a better life? How do I create a better world by a community that's using these stories as instruction for living a better life? And by us living a better life, having that spread to everybody. And that's where you're talking about spreading the word. We're not saying that you have to be Jewish in order to take advantage of the kind of world that Judaism could conceivably bring with, the right attitude.
So now we'll look at the other point of the timeline. What do Jews believe happens to us after we die?
Well, there is no one thing that people believe. There is no, like I said, we don't have a dogma, we don't have a catechism, we don't have... Now, having said that, we usually don't conceive of the traditional Christian heaven and hell scheme unless we're trying to make a point. So we'll talk about the holy thief, who was a thief in his lifetime, and he's on trial, and during the trial he steals the sins of Israel so that they'll be saved in the end of days. So he steals them and burns them so they can't be used against the people. And so you see that even a thief has a purpose.
Let me ask you it this way. If I came to you and I said, Rabbi, I only have a few days to live, where am I going? What would you say to me at that point?
You're going to be with God.
That's where we're going to go.
Yeah. Rabbi Rami Shapiro has, I think, a very nice image that I've used on a lot of occasions. The ocean is God. You're a wave. And you go up on the shore, which is your life, and you spend your life trickling down to go back to be with God. Now, you may have screwed up. You may have dug yourself a hole over here by doing bad things. And those waters will not go back, and your spirit will not go back. But it doesn't come close to Dante.
That's right. The circles. That's interesting. That's a beautiful analogy. I like that.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get into some more intricacies. The Wandering Jew.
Well,
is he still out there?
We're all out there.
Who is this Wandering Jew?
It's all of us. Jews have been in exile since the destruction of the temple. The temple was destroyed twice. We've been in exile for the first time to Babylonia, the second time all over. There were Jews as far east as Kaifeng, China. And they got there so early that they didn't even have some of the Jewish holidays like Hanukkah and Purim. So, and then the Jews went north and west into Europe, and they went Spain, and from Spain across the Straits of Gibraltar through North Africa and through the Arabic world. Maimonides, you mentioned before, started off in Spain, made the trip all the way across North Africa and became the chief physician for the Caliph.
That's right, the Sultan.
Yeah, the Sultan. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
he was an interesting character.
Yeah.
We can't wait to bring Rabbi Berman back. We have so many questions still left to ask, and we're running out of time. So the last minute's going to have to be dedicated to the fastball. Are you ready to handle it?
Go for it.
Well, here's the question: why are there so many Jews in Hollywood?
Well, it's an interesting thing. The movie industry sort of started on the East Coast with guys like D.W. Griffith and Thomas Edison. But they weren't taking movies, Edison particularly didn't take movies so seriously, but he didn't want anybody let me put it this way, Edison wasn't keen on Jews taking over his industry, or being in it for that matter. And so when Jews couldn't get work, they came west. Hollywood is essentially founded by 6 Russian Jewish immigrants.
Really?
That start the studio, Sam Goldwyn, Zucker, and they carve out a sort of I don't want to say a code, but they develop a style of storytelling, and the lighting is good here, and the climate's good for filming. A lot of advantages to moving the film industry to California, besides getting away from Edison's goons. We're coming around and busting up your sets.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, so there's a lot of Jews in Hollywood because Jews kind of started it.
So it just kind of developed from there.
Yeah, I mean, the Warner Brothers were Jewish, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer.
The Three Stooges.
All 5 of them.
Oh, 5 of them. Well, there you go. Rabbi Berman hits a home run again for us. Thank you so much, Rabbi. We really appreciate it. We can't wait to bring you back. We got so much information. And I am serious about Richard Freeman. Hopefully having you co-host that'd be a lot of fun.
That could be a lot of fun, yeah.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. Remember, wherever psychology is involved, even in Israel, we are there. See you next time, everyone.